So I briefly want to talk about the Texas high school shooting that happened on Wednesday. First, and this was breaking news yesterday, the alleged Texas high school shooter, we say alleged even though he's basically the one who did it, he was released from jail the day after he shot and injured 3 people in a school. Now, maybe you would say that we should go easy on him because he's a high schooler, but he's in fact 18, so he's technically an adult. And I think that this is problematic, to say the least. Now, this is the shooter in question. His name is Timothy George Simpkins. Now, I know there is generally a policy by a lot of people to not give out the names of mass shooters, but this is a different scenario. He didn't do this for fame or anything. He did it because he was being bullied, and perhaps to an extent, he wanted revenge. We'll address that in a second. But I also want to talk about the fact that if he were white, you better believe the media would be talking about white privilege day in and day out. But because he is not white, you can clearly see that this is just another story. It's not an example of white privilege or of how racist America is as a whole, and so it's just a story about a high school shooter, which is not downplaying the story by any means, but it is saying that there's a completely different spin on it because he's black. Now, in case you don't know what happened leading up to this school shooting, there was a fight that broke out between him and a 15-year-old student. Now, it does seem that the 15-year-old student was the aggressor who initiated or started this fight. I do want to point that out. The teachers eventually broke up the fight, but that's when Simpkins walked to his orange backpack, grabbed a gun, and began shooting at the student that he had fought with. One student told police that he shot 7 to 8 times. A different student said he only heard 3 to 6 shots. So that's, a pretty big difference. But the key point here, I think, is that yes, there was a fight, but the fight had been broken up. They were no longer fighting. This student, even if he was in danger during the fight, he was now safe, but he still decided to go and get his gun that he brought to school in the first place, which is obviously not what you should do, and then shoot the student. It's not as if in that moment he was in any danger. He was not defending himself. It seems more like he was getting revenge on the student. The 15-year-old is not the only person who was shot. So he was in critical condition as of yesterday, but a teenage girl was also grazed by a bullet, and a 25-year-old teacher who broke up the fight was also shot. The 2 of them are in good condition, and they're probably going to recover, not going to be an issue. There was also another injury where a different teacher, I guess, fell over during the shooting, but she herself wasn't shot. So this 18-year-old student brought a gun to school and shot 3 people. He wasn't shooting indiscriminately, but he still shot 3 people, and he's responsible for that. After this all went down, he ran away, but then did turn himself into the cops a little bit later the same day. Now, like I said, this is a story that was breaking yesterday when he was actually released from jail, and I think it's completely ridiculous that one day you can bring a gun to school, shoot 3 people, and then the next day you can be released from jail. I don't think that's really a good policy. Perhaps you can disagree with me and let me know why. And perhaps they argued that he wasn't a danger to anyone else because he was targeting one student specifically. But I still feel like this is not the best move. But the reason I'm talking about it, it's also because how his parents or his family have reacted to this whole situation. According to them, Timothy was targeted for bullying because he had fancy clothes and a $35,000 car. So they're effectively saying that because he was privileged, not white privilege, but the real privilege of having money, that's why he was bullied, and that's why all of this happened. Now, before we get into what they are saying, I first want to point out that I don't think teenagers should have $35,000 cars. Like, even if you can afford it, that's a waste of money. They're bad drivers, especially teenage boys, so you should give them a crap car that works enough for them to get to school and back, but they don't need a fancy $35,000 car. So his family, they said that they were glad he didn't decide to commit suicide, which is a good thing, but I feel like they're kind of shifting the goalposts here a little bit, saying that, well, yeah, it's wrong what he did, but he didn't commit suicide, so that's a good thing. They did say that he was robbed it was recorded. It happened not just once, it happened twice. He was scared and he was afraid. Now that was according to a relative. He was, at least on a semi-consistent basis, I guess, targeted for bullying by this 15-year-old student. And here his family said that he was robbed twice. Even with that being the case, it's certainly extreme to bring a gun to school. Let's say that the 2 times he was robbed happened in the past, and perhaps this was just a third fight of some kind. After being robbed twice, he brings a gun to school, and after the fight is broken up, he grabs his gun and then shoots the student. Again, it wasn't in self-defense because the fight had already ended. This is to prevent the student from doing that at some perhaps point in the future, but it wasn't an immediate need in that case. Not that there is necessarily a need to shoot someone, but you know what I mean. Another cousin on social media said that it could have been a decision that he have committed suicide. He was trying to protect himself, and they were blessed financially, and so that's why he was being bullied, effectively. So his family continued and said that we have to look at the fact that bullying is real, and it takes all of us, and I do apologize. We ask as a family for forgiveness of any type of hurt. They said that he was able to get things that other teenagers cannot have. Because he wore nice clothes, because he drove nice cars, he was like a target. And then she last said that the decision he made, taking the gun, we're not justifying that, that was not right. But he was trying to protect himself. And we hope the police department does the investigation properly. And they once again brought up the fact that when you're being bullied, when there's bullies throughout this nation, you hear of young people committing suicide. Now, before we move on, I do want to point out that according to this article from the New York Post, there was actually only one other person who was shot. So the 15-year-old boy is still in critical condition. The 25-year-old teacher was shot but is in good condition. But the teenage girl we talked about was apparently not struck by gunfire, according to the New York Post. And we also find out that the teacher who fell down but who wasn't shot, she's actually pregnant. Now, I can understand where the family is trying to come from. Naturally, when someone in your family does something like this, you try to defend them without justifying it, and I get that. But I think we need to realize that even if you are a victim of bullying, like perhaps he was, that doesn't mean you can bring a gun to school and then just start shooting. Other people were injured in this situation as well. It didn't just involve him and the person who was bullying him. There were bystanders, other students and teachers in the area. Now, even if there weren't, it still wouldn't have been okay. The reason I'm talking about this one is because I think it's a different type of school shooting. It's not as if he went to school and just wanted to hurt people. He was being targeted, and so he, in turn, targeted someone else. I am not justifying it because it can't be justified, and this 15-year-old student may very well die because of his actions. My point in bringing this up is I don't think he should have been released. Plain and simple. Perhaps you don't think he's a danger to anyone else, and I think there might be some justification for that. But at the same time, he did literally just shoot someone. A couple more days in jail isn't the worst thing in the world. But he got out the very next day. Regardless what you believe here, it's clear that this is still a tragedy. Any school shooting is a tragedy. Schools are where students should go, and they should be safe. There shouldn't be shootings, and there also shouldn't be bullyings. But just because there is bullying, that doesn't justify any sort of shooting or violent response like we see here. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents on this. I just want to talk about it real briefly. So that's all for this video, and I hope to see you next time.